Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Uzoma Asagwara. I will be the moderator for this panel. Before we jump right into things, I'll just a couple of announcements in terms of the space. There are 2 washrooms in the space. This washroom right here has a single stall. There's also a baby changing table in there. There's a washroom around the corner if you're going toward the back as well. This panel is about safer spaces, and there will be some content in this panel that for some folks may trigger some heightened emotions or thoughts, feelings around some of the content. And if at any point you need to just get up and leave the space, absolutely do so. If at any point, and there's no wrong way to exit the space or remove yourself from the space, just feel free to do whatever you need to feel comfortable. There is also an art therapist on site. Her name is Jess Winicki, and she's in the back there. She's actually waving right now if you want to take a look so you know who this person is. She brought a lot of yarn for the yarning, I was told. And she's there if you need to just chat with someone, check in, do some yarning. It's knitting. Okay, whatever you want to do with yarn. She's the yarn expert. It's open. And yeah, I'm also someone who, after the panel, if you do want to have a conversation, if there's stuff you need to process with somebody, I'm happy to stick around and have a conversation and chat with you as well. So, but before we get into a bit more about the panel, I want to acknowledge that we are all gathered tonight on Treaty 1 territory, traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji, Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and homeland of the Métis Nation. It's always really, really important also to acknowledge the contribution of the Inuit community, Inuit people who have a strong community here in Manitoba. It's really important that we always acknowledge the land that we gather on and the relationships and that we build with folks as community members, that we work toward reconciliation, and a big part of being able to do that, an instrumental part of being able to do that is truth and having truthful conversations about, especially in the context of talking about safer spaces, recognizing who is disproportionately impacted by accessing spaces safely or as safe as possible. And tonight is an opportunity for all of us to do some learning and some listening and be able to leave here tonight and move forward in a better way in how we build relationships and interact with one another. So I'm not going to share anything about myself because I think it's on the website about this event. My name is Uzoma. I'm just here to moderate a conversation with some pretty outstanding folks who do some really great work, really important work. And I'm really fortunate to be able to share space with all of you tonight and hear what they have to say. So the first person that I'd really like to introduce to you is Angie Hutchinson. Angie, do you mind giving folks a wave so they know who you are? Wonderful. Angie is a First Nation woman from the Mississippitik. Nope. From the, I practiced. Mississippitik. Thank you. Okay, Cree Nation, currently living in Winnipeg. Angie's work is focused on gender equality, addressing exploitation and violence against women, relationship building, and improving the economic, legal, social, and health status of Indigenous women and their families. Working as a helper in many different roles, Angie approaches her work with a culturally appropriate and trauma-informed understanding, creating space for both Indigenous and Western knowledge. Working from the heart, Angie creates a space of inclusion and trust to foster natural connections. It's Angie. The next person I'd like to introduce is Lana. Lana Adeleye-Olusae. And I'm Naija, so it's like I should do better. No, I'm first gen. It's like there's a gap. There's something. Lana is a seasoned human resource professional, researcher, and coach, skilled in offering employee and organizational development strategy solutions in support of business goals and achievements. He brings a wealth of experience in developing and implementing strategic directions for business units, startups, and projects in various industry sectors to bear on his assignments. He is currently Director of Human Resources at the Manitoba Museum and also offers management consulting services under Sure Footing Consulting, Training, and Coaching, Inc. to small and medium-sized organizations in various sectors. Lana is a really gracious and lovely and very funny person. Very funny. You can expect many jokes tonight. No pressure, Lana. No pressure. Our next expert panelist is Stephanie Strugar. Why are you laughing? I haven't even, okay. Stephanie Strugar is Manitoba's trainer for Cultural Human Resources Council, maintaining respectful arts workplaces. As a trainer, she's educated in the arts and cultural organizations. She educates arts and cultural organizations on how to create safer spaces for artists and art administrators of all disciplines. She is the founder and president of Defy Inc., Manitoba's first cross-cultural dance and wellness non-for-profit organization, a not-for-profit that is focused on removing barriers to performing and education services for performers with disabilities. She has served as a governance board of director with Arts Accessibility Network of Manitoba and is the owner of Definity Dance Studio and Productions and Art with SAS Consulting. That's a fantastic name. Did you come up with that name?
Yes.
Okay, you hesitated.
No, my brother did.
Your brother? Okay.
It was a joke that turned into something real.
Okay, there you go. She has completed several business programs, including Make a Change, Canada's Business Abilities Program for Entrepreneurs with a Disability, and has a rich career in management in retail and hospitality. As a visual and performing artist entrepreneur with a disability, her goal is to empower those working in the arts trade with practical tools for creating safer spaces. Stephanie.
You nailed my name.
I nailed your name.
That's why I was giggling.
Stephanie, I don't know. I nailed your name. We'll talk later. Terence Fuller, has worked in the Manitoba film industry since 2004, and for the last 2 years has served as the steward for the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Local 856, which is based in Winnipeg. In his current position, Terence has undertaken numerous training programs, including receiving a conflict management certificate through Mediation Services Winnipeg, harassment investigation level 1 and 2 certificate through Hill Advisory Services, and safety training through both Safe Work Manitoba and the Construction Safety Association of Manitoba. As a veteran of the film industry, just a quick, what does veteran mean?
It sounds like a word someone else used.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay. As an old guy of the film industry, Terence has instructed multiple training courses for Film Training Manitoba for close to a decade. Okay, that's where that comes from. Yeah, veteran. Okay. In addition, he has aided in the organization's curriculum development and instruction of the Set Orientation, Safety, Awareness, and Respect in the Workplace in-class course. In 2018, Terence was appointed as a co-chair of the Film Training of Manitoba. That is Terence. All right, so just a gentle reminder to everyone that we're all here to, listen and learn and share space respectfully and mindfully and from a place of being open. And so, you may not, some of what you might hear today, I'm certainly anticipating for myself, will be new information. And we encourage you to ask any questions that you have, either at the end of the panel, which is going to be kind of, Q&A with me and these lovely folks, but also kind of a conversation, we're hoping. So if you do have questions, please save those questions for the end. You'll be able to ask folks individually or collectively. And as well, if you're not comfortable or you would prefer to ask your questions just by writing them down and passing them to someone. You can pass them to Elise over here, holding the pink paper. Which brings up stuff for me, because pink paper, when I was a kid, pink slips in school meant you were in trouble. So every time I see a sheet of like little pink paper, speaking of being triggered, okay. And Elise is a wonderful organizer with Manitoba Music, just so you know who the person with the pink paper is. We've also got some other organizers in the room. We've got Allison, who is with, Allison, remind me. Film Training Manitoba. You've got Rachel from Creative Manitoba. We've got Reynold, who is a lovely volunteer here with us tonight as well. So please, let's give it up for our organizers and volunteers tonight. Okay, so panelists, my first question for you. Where is your absolute favorite place to eat in Winnipeg? Favorite place to eat. Please use the mic when you answer the question. It's not a trick question, it's a sincere question. I really love the foods, so.
Mary Brown's,
Mary
poutine.
Brown's,
Yes.
the poutine, okay.
So good, the chicken, you gotta try it.
The chicken, okay. The chicken and the poutine, Mary Brown's. Where is that? Is that in the Exchange? Mary Brown's.
Unfortunately not, because I would live there.
Mary Brown's. Oh, there's a few locations. I know Mary Brown's now.
Yeah, but whoever puts it
The chicken.
downtown is gonna be rich.
Okay.
I will help with the crowdfunding campaign. Just
Okay, gotcha. Okay, Mary Brown's, chicken poutine. Anyone else? Favorite places to eat?
Sun Fortune on Pembina Highway.
Sun
for
Fortune.
The Chinese hot pot. It's
Chinese hot pot.
phenomenal.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
Terrence, bringing out the hot pot game. Okay.
I'm gonna go with Theta's Thai.
Sorry?
Theta's Thai.
Theta's Thai. What area of the city is that in?
I guess downtown, right on Donald.
Okay.
Broadway.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, Lana, you're the last one. Last but not least.
I was laughing because I was thinking, how do I go out for lunch? But when I want to eat out, I like the Victoria Seafood Restaurant on St. Mary's.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Okay,
like Chinese a
wonderful.
lot.
You like China? Okay, thank you very much for sharing that, folks. Wonderful. Anyone surprised by any of the answers we heard? No? Any judgment in the room? There's nods. This is a safer space with the judgment. Okay. All right. So my second question rather. I'm wondering, as someone who, this is important work. We talk about safer spaces. As someone who I organize with a collective called QPOC Winnipeg. So we create safer spaces for queer and trans, two-spirit, Black, Indigenous people of color. And so me being a queer Black person, someone who's also gender nonconforming, my experiences as an individual, the work I do in community really informs the work that we do creating safer spaces and creating spaces in general. So I'm wondering, what, if anything, for yourselves, personally, individually, and in terms of your personal experiences, informs, like if you had to pick a few things that really, in terms of your experiences and your values, really inform the work that you do in creating safer spaces, what would that be?
Okay.
Thanks, Angie.
I'll take that book. I also feel like I'm eventually gonna knock my tea over there. So.
Do you want to move it? Are you okay?
No, it's
Yeah?
okay.
Okay.
I'm just kind of a clumsy person, so I
Okay.
would
That's okay. Knock it over. Yeah.
Safer spaces.
Just knock it over. Knock it off the table. Yeah.
I think in my work, and I'll start off with saying I don't work in the arts. That's not kind of my area of expertise. But the work that I do is really around looking at the experience of Indigenous people within Canada and how there has been a systemic dismantling of our communities and our values and who we are as people. And so my work and what kind of is the values that that I thrive on is that reclamation and allowing that inclusion at an equal space and at an equal value to the the values and knowledges that are kind of set as the standard for across Canada. Personally, I've had a number of experiences that, that were very unsafe in many different ways. And so a lot of the work that I do is I can relate to either my own personal experience or my family's or my friends. And I see how that experience within the colonial process within Canada has really created a lot of harms within our communities. And so my work is not only to look at how do we heal from those harms, but also how do we change those kind of societal values so that we aren't continuing to perpetuate harm in those spaces and in those ways.
Okay, thank you.
There must be the willingness to be open to diverse opinions and also be inclusive. I don't know if you're familiar with this program on TV called Undercover Boss. Watching it, what I get out of it is this. The frontline person that you think has only high school, that you think does not know something, may actually bring the best ideas to the organization. So how do you create an environment for that person to express themselves without feeling foolish? And I also believe that when you go to work, you need to enjoy what you do. If you try to calculate how many years you spend in the work environment, the active time of your life, it's actually a lot. I did a calculation, and it's like you are sitting in the office for 7 years. If you calculate number of hours. Wow. So if you don't enjoy that time, you will retire as a miserable person. So you need to enjoy your work. And how can you help people to enjoy the work that they do? Is to create, there's this debate about safe or safer spaces. I would say safer because I won't say all places are not safe. And that means people need to be happy in what they do, feel comfortable, feel accepted and acknowledged in whatever they do. So it drives me because I believe that there's so much of potential in people. So people call me the incurable optimist because I believe there's something good about someone. We may be different, but we are not deficient. What we have in common is more than what differentiates us. So I don't want to dwell on what differentiates us too much. I'll rather look at what we have in common. And I went to a conference one day and somebody said, there's no them. There are only us. We are human beings. There's no other race that is fighting with us. So, and genetically, if you look at all of us, what is different is probably maybe just point something %. So I love a situation whereby, while you were sharing earlier about the rule, is it the golden rule, do unto others as you like them to do unto you. Some people came up with another one that I like, but it's challenging. Do unto people the way they want to be done to them. Which means I need to understand how you want me to treat you, how you want me to address you. You were referring to that earlier. Then I should then do that. So that way you feel safer when you're dealing with me and you feel comfortable. So that's what really gets to me.
Okay, thank you.
Should I give it to you?
I got my own. I got the hookup. So I just want to kind of echo back a couple things they said without going too deep and getting kind of confusing. So a lot of the work I do works around language. So not policing language, but understanding what are the appropriate terms in terms of like legislation, how to speak to people, and kind of just things to watch out for. So what we were talking about earlier before the panel began was, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to say and do the wrong thing, but the most important thing is to, acknowledge that, face that, and figure out how you can do better. So if someone says, this is how I'd like to be spoken to, respect that and follow through with that. But that doesn't happen by accident. You do have to educate yourself. And luckily, we have Google, and all of this information is, widely available for free. So anybody can learn. And it's just having enough respect for your fellow citizen or artist or arts administrator to learn those skill sets. So what I like to think of is think of the outsiders and think of the outsider to the outsider. So when we talk about inclusive or safe spaces, people will start with something like, okay, it's wheelchair accessible. Well, that's great, but it's still at the back door. If you do have it, not poorly lit. Now there's a couple things that you can do besides just learning language. There's incorporating digital technology. There's apps that can say, hey, you're coming to a venue. You can let them know that you're disabled, and they can be set up for you and make sure that they have an attendant available if needed. So there's lots of different layers to that. Also just talking about not assuming things by looking at people, right? So not assuming someone's gender, their race, if they have a disability. A lot of disabilities and health conditions are invisible. Understanding the difference between learning and intellectual disabilities and how all of these things exist on a spectrum. So no one's asking anyone to be an expert in any of those things. What we're asking is to learn the basics and respect them and do your very, very best to impart that with action. And so as an organization, you can, look at your policies and procedures after you've done that and revamp them. You can, change your actual working space. But think about it like this, like if you were a mother who's a performer and have children, and you had to, bring them to rehearsal, is there a space for that? Are you inclusive to women in the industry who, have a family, or is it over for them now that they've had kids? How hard are you actively working as an organization to be inclusive to people with disabilities and who are different? And a lot of what you said is, boils back to like systemic and classism, right? Like, how are you inclusive to people of different economic backgrounds? Some dance studios offer a sliding scale subsidy program so that everyone can access it. There's grants. So inclusivity to me is doing your very best effort to do what you can with the resources you have and get better as an organization or as artists. That's really what it is, out of love and respect so that we all succeed in the career.
Okay, thank you. Terrence.
I think a big thing for me is I know that some of the things that I come up against, before I got into film, I did a variety of jobs, working in kind of welding shops and factories and warehouse work. I've always been kind of loud and obnoxious and very vocal anyway. So I think the one thing that I focus on with the feedback from the mic hopefully doesn't get too bad. The one thing that I focus on now that I'm in this job is how can I kind of help people to have the same kind of voice that I have, because I do realize that obviously my experiences with things come from a very different place from most people that work on our film sets, and especially with the amount that we're growing. So how can I kind of help everybody who's there feel like they can voice, whether it's something like a safety concern or whether it's someone being bullied or harassed, how can I kind of help create that environment where they feel comfortable speaking up no matter what the situation is, and how can I kind of be there for them to support them in that way? Yeah.
Okay. So, wide range of experiences and perspectives in terms of what informs the work that you do in creating safer spaces. I'm curious to know, in the last, and this is a personal observation, so in the last 5 years, there has been this, in the art scene, there has been a lot of awareness around safer spaces and creating safer spaces and safer space policies being developed and put up in events and at venues and things like that, or maybe an establishment has something happen that is awful and someone in community is really impacted by that, and then a policy, safer space policy, comes out after a few hours of some training. And so I'm really curious to know, this is work that you do, it's ongoing work that you do, right? So how does an organization or a business or anyone go from not just conceptualizing or recognizing the importance of creating a safer space, but also sustaining it and maybe even having it be, kind of like a living process, right? Something that can evolve over time. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not that's important, or how someone can go about, or an organization can go about doing that?
Very shortly, for me, the biggest thing for us is kind of what's the buy-in from our employers and us as well, to kind of what are the gaps that we can kind of bridge to kind of keep those communications open, but especially in our industry, specifically in film. I can only speak about obviously not stage set or anything, but having them understand that it's an artistic environment, but it is still a workplace, and how important these things are, and how we, even though we're kind of the union and they're the employer, how we can still work together with them to kind of keep that dialogue going and keep just the conversation of how important those things are, right? Instead of, here's our Band-Aid, we've written up this policy, we're going to post it on the wall, thanks very much, and walk away.
Okay.
What's the continual conversations from there, which is where we can all kind of just kind of have our piece and have our say in it, right?
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just kind of, highlight something what he already said is it has to be an ongoing conversation. It can't be just a reaction to a situation. And part of that is that ongoing dialogue to see, when we respond by just issuing a policy, it's not necessarily going to be reflective of what is needed. You're going to have ongoing conversations about what does it actually look like to utilize that policy. A paper on the wall is just a paper on the wall. And so do people understand what they need to do to invoke a policy? Do they feel safe in taking steps to go through that process? And if they don't, how can you start to have conversations to create that space and an understanding on how to, invoke that policy? And if it misses the mark, which a lot of policies do, we have to actually look at, once it's in place, is it being used? And if not, we need to know why, and we need to look at how that policy may or may not need to be altered. And continuing to have those conversations at all times. This isn't just a one and done kind of situation. What does that look like in everyday kind of working environments between employees, between employers and bosses, between unions and employees? Like there's multiple different spaces and conversations that those all need to take place within.
Okay.
I fully agree with your positions as stated. It's not enough to have the policies. How do you then make it reality? I'll share from an experience. We had the policies. We shared it with everyone. We had documents for them to read and all of that. We went to session to talk, and we left it at that. And we expected people to be adults to understand. But a couple of years later, some things started happening. And we started questioning, like you said, the reporting. There's a policy. Why didn't you do anything about it? And the issue of the fear came there. So that's the issue of, did we create a safe space for somebody to bring up issues? So we had to go all over again, spent about 3 hours with staff in different groups, and started sharing, and came up with a long list. I don't know, we say we are adults, but sometimes we behave like kids, in the sense that people need to be given a list of behaviors that they shouldn't do. So now what we've done in one organization is that I have 2 sheets that are printed out for the person that if anybody comes to say, Stephanie, I think I'm experiencing something, give them that list and say, which one of these do you think you're experiencing? Because sometimes people cannot put words to what they're experiencing. So we realized that it's not only the policy, like both of you have stated, that there's a need to actually give examples. That's why I like the one of the CHRC. There's a video that shows you example in the arts, how you can go overboard, even when you're acting in a play or a movie and so on. So when we now tried that, we realized that people understood it better. So, and we have found for those who are able to report that we have their back. So they know that we first of all want to believe you. And so we started that process, and things are getting better. So also, apart from the issue of maybe harassment, the one that we are still struggling with is the messaging, because when you want to go gender neutral, you have to work on the policies all over again. So we're trying to ensure that every policy, automatically you write he or she or something. But so now we are using people, we're asking them to tell us, how do you want to be identified? So we're trying to write that. Ignore whatever Microsoft Word says, because sometimes we tell you this grammar is wrong. So we just tell you, forget it. So it's a continuous work. Sure. And everybody, we all need to feel safe to talk about it. And with inclusive language, we'll get better at it.
So just to add on to some of the things you said, some of the steps that I highly recommend is developing a code of ethics. So that does go in your policies and procedures manual, but it's very, very articulated, and it's not the same as a mission statement and your objectives. It's being like, what specifically do you mean when you're going to say that you're accessible, and what categories within that, because that's a whole like can of worms, right? So being very specific on that. Another thing is, like I said, integrate digital technology. I believe that every organization has a responsibility to do, a corporate audit. So an ethics audit. And
can I jump in for a sec? What do
Sure.
you mean by digital?
So there is
technology?
apps, like I mentioned earlier, where if you're coming to a space and you are disabled, all that the person who's organizing that event has to do is download that app. They'll know that you're on your way, and then you're protecting them, right? If you have somebody who's in a wheelchair who's coming to an event at 8 o'clock at night, and the door is in the back of an alley downtown and it's not well lit, like that's a huge safety issue. So you're probably alienating a ginormous, chunk of the community who are just not going to put themselves in those positions, right? So that's just one example. So doing an annual edit, I would say you should do it more, right? But more than that, and utilizing consultants and people who, like yourself, right, who specialize in a specific thing, and having them come in and really say, where are the holes in your policy? So there is the CHRC training videos that you can do online for free. That's I think every staff should do that. Also, you can have them sign their code of ethics, an agreement of saying this is how we're gonna, actively work towards changing our industry. And then you do, interview and an audit with your employees, your administrators, and kind of rate them on a scale of like, hey, where are you, improving, and where do you still need to improve? Because like you said, you can talk about and you give pieces of paper, but unless there's a way to keep people accountable and responsible, and not necessarily calling out, but saying we need to do better as a community and let's help each other do that. And these can be complicated issues, right? Not all not-for-profits can pay for 1 million consultants. So bridging those gaps, like we need to partnership and work together, figure out where those gaps are in knowledge in the market, and actively work towards improving that. And like I said, the people and the technologies in place, really just ask them, reach out, do a survey, ask your community or your members, where do we need to improve in this? And offering workshops, like, apply for funding, offer this to your members. And I think that is where you will start to see the changes.
Okay, wonderful. I really appreciate what I'm learning from listening to all of you folks. I think there's a couple of things that really stood out for me just now, but one of the things, and I'm glad that you brought it up, Lana, is actually explaining to people what maybe inappropriate or unacceptable terms or language or behaviors may be. That is something that, and I saw this quote recently, Rachel, I think it's Cargyle, who is an activist, just a really, really incredible Black academic activist, just across the board, tweeted something along the lines of, and I'm not going to quote exactly, I could look it up, I'll do it after, when I'm not on camera. But basically saying, like, if you're an organization or you're a business or you're a space that is going to hire folks on, right? If you're going to diversify a space or an environment, but you haven't done the work to deal with racism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, all these things in your space, and you're going to bring people into that space because you want to diversify it, actually all you're doing is bringing people into a violent and unsafe environment, right? So before I get into my next question based on something along those lines, I want to acknowledge what you just said. Sometimes people don't even know what you're talking about when you're talking about safer spaces and what meets the standard of being unsafe, right? Not everybody has access to the same information or would even know to Google, right? I mean, and I do that too, people. I'm like, just Google it. Someone asks me a question and I'm like, Google, you got Google? But it's like, actually, sometimes people don't even know what to Google, right? So spelling it out for folks, this is actually what's unacceptable. This is language that is inappropriate for these reasons is a really helpful thing. You're thinking of something right now?
Yeah, I just want to, and we may get into this further in the panel, but I just want to highlight it's not only addressing behavior that's inappropriate or unacceptable, but we also have to understand when folks are experiencing that behavior, they may not be able to address it themselves. They may not be able to articulate what exactly has happened to them based on previous experiences within their lives. And so, like, I can speak, very personally to an example of I was in a university setting, and it was a course that was based in conflict resolution and human rights. And so my expectations of the class were slightly elevated. And within the very first class, as the only visibly Indigenous person within a group of 30 people, I was subjugated to a 15-minute dialogue amongst everyone how the experience of Indigenous people in Canada is a poor example of genocide. And this is the work that I do on a daily basis. And in that moment, I was completely frozen and I could not respond because I felt so unsafe in that moment that I couldn't get up, I couldn't speak, I couldn't move out of my seat. And so folks who are experiencing that also need to be given some language too, because sometimes you can't articulate what is happening to you. That is a trauma response. And so in all of these conversations, it's not just about pointing out what not to do, but how do we support folks who are experiencing these types of behaviors as well.
So I just want
Thank
to,
you for that.
just add on to something, just to clarify what you were saying with my comment earlier about the Google. What I meant by that is sort of a joke, is like it's our job now. We're in this day and age to take responsibility. And if you don't know what to Google, start with the organizations like industry leaders, right? So Creative Manitoba, Manitoba Music, see what resources and their partners are. And, like I said, consulting is a great thing, but start there. Start working with other organizations, right? And then bringing in the people. And like you mentioned, it's not just about calling out behavior. Utilizing your code of ethics is important. But really, like I said, it boils down to ongoing conversations, and then using the reporting mechanism that's now available through CHRC is really powerful, because you're not in that position of a power imbalance, or like you're in frozen state. You have the time to process it, make a statement, write it down, and work through it. And then you have a safe set of people around you who will help you navigate that issue, who aren't going to be like, I'm hooked up with this person, so if I tell this person what's happened, I may not get that next gig, right? So there is that problem too, is a lot of us are afraid to say or make changes because we're afraid it's going to impact our professional career, right? Yeah. So that is another helpful tool.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just to support what Angie is talking about, sometimes people themselves cannot say what they are going through. Your policies or procedures should have a place for others who observe it. So if I observe that the way you've spoken to Stephanie is not appropriate, I should be able to report it. In this instance that I'm going to give as an example, this lady had been experiencing this harassment for over 1 year, but was not able to say it. But somebody else observed it, and it was that individual that raised the issue. And we protected the identity of the person that observed it because it's in line with the policy. And we started the investigations. And we finally finished it, and we had to let that person go. So that sent a message across. It doesn't have to be the individual, because the individual may be trying to actually fit in. And so they allow it, because when we asked this individual, why did you allow this? They said, look, I'm in a place, you mentioned the power imbalance. This guy is like the top guy in the department that everybody wants to associate with. So I'm just new. So do you want me to go against him and then lose my job or not get the prime opportunities? That is why I couldn't speak. So, whereas it's not really a power, the person was not supervising, but she just did not have the voice. So encouraging people in the environment to come up with it is also good, because part of the training is what the normal person, the average person would think. If I look at Stephanie and I make a comment, maybe we are friends, and pass it off as a joke. But Terence is there and says, Lana, that didn't sound well. So we're encouraged to call out. Even if you feel comfortable with it, you are there, you don't know the relationship, but that is not an appropriate thing.
Sorry, another thing to add on to is another really powerful thing is being transparent. So that's having your policies and procedures on your website, your code of ethics, and how you're going to specifically deal with things and help is so that people don't have to constantly come into your organization and call you and email and do that Googling. Empower people, empower your artists, your fellow administrators with that information. It should be easily accessible all the time, and encouraging continuing education, like I said. So even if you can't bring a consultant, you take the course. One person has to take the course, they bring home the manual, and then discuss that. All those are initial steps, but to reach a wide audience, use your online platforms all the time.
Okay.
Let me just.
Sure.
I'm not trying to undercut the consultants that are in the room. One thing I know in our field of HR is that we share policies and procedures. You don't have to start from scratch. We know, for example, in the museum, the Manitoba Museum, that a lot of arts and culture organizations cannot afford an HR person. So we openly will share. Okay. So if you want to say, where do I start from? All you have to do is just be in contact with us. Because it's a public document. We'll send it to you. We have one on harassment, discrimination. We had on racism and respectful workplace. We'll share with you. So you can then tweak that to suit your own organization. So in case you're wondering, how am I going to do this? I don't have the money. I don't have the grant. Okay. You can get it.
That's great.
So.
That's wonderful. And actually, Lana also offered me a tour, a personal tour of the Manitoba Museum. And so I'm extending that invitation out. If anyone would like to join, Lana's going to take care of us. Just very generous, very generous.
Let me get out.
No, we're going to move on. We got to move on, Lana.
No, so, sincerely, Uzoma, because when we're talking about all of this, there are people who cannot afford to come into the museum.
Sure.
They cannot pay the $12. So on Manitoba Day, the whole museum is open. But apart from that, we have access for all programs where community groups can send in a letter and say there are people in our community who would like them to come. So can you give us a free pass? So that is open. So if you want to explore that, what she said is true.
Sorry, to add something else to something you said earlier with your articulating behaviors not to do.
Okay.
Right? That's great, but as you mentioned, CHRC has the actual videos. So sometimes, like you said, you either frozen in the moment, you don't really know, does this fall under legislation? Is this really harassment? Because it could be clouded with tons of triggered memories and trauma and layers. And so those videos are really helpful because you can kind of relate that behavior.
Sure.
So using, right?
Yeah.
And it's online now, so it takes you step by step by step. So then you can really evaluate that. I think even when you're training your administrators, your members, go through case by case scenarios, because that's typically how we really learn well. And it's usually in those moments, because how often do you have the same incident happen again, right? That's traumatic. You don't. And it's usually really unique. You'll hear often unique one-off circumstances, and so people have no idea where to reference it from. So those stories, like I said on CHRC website, will really help you bring those pieces together.
Okay. Lots of resources being shared here. Thank you. And thank you for sharing and with a personal experience that really, really illustrated that really well. And was a really important perspective as well, so thank you. So I guess my next question, can we just is everybody good? Just want to do a quick check-in. How are we doing? Yeah? Okay. So, question. Hold the microphone closer. Hold the mic, okay.
No beatboxing though, right?
No beatboxing. Okay, thank you, Elise. So we've got about maybe 15 minutes or so left-ish. So my next question is around, I guess, and let's just be totally brutally honest here in terms of what's really going on in the arts community, what's really going on, and whether that's, you don't have to organize in the arts community, whatever that means, right? But in terms of even accessing spaces, what are some things for you folks that you see, whether it's infrequently, maybe frequently, or some things that you're seeing that you're like, wow, this really needs to shift, and it's something that, for whatever the reasons are, maybe we're having a hard time making that shift? Or is there anything that really stands out for you that you're like, I just kind of wish we could just tackle this thing, or if we put our resources together, this would get dealt with? But is there anything that really, top of mind stands out for you that like, okay, this needs to be addressed in the art scene, art communities, ASAP? Okay.
The biggest thing for me is, again, to kind of double down on what I said before, is buy-in from the employers, whether that's producers from town, from out of town. That for me is huge. I sometimes feel like I don't see enough forward momentum from employers and their representatives, and I find that very frustrating because you feel like you're part of an organization that's trying to push things forward, but if you don't have that support and they don't have the systems in place because they don't feel it's their responsibility, or this idea that this is the arts and some things are acceptable because it's an art space. It's people's place of business. It's a workplace, right? And I think sometimes that gets forgotten, that ultimately we're not doing this work. Again, speaking of film, we're not doing this work because it's a hobby. We have bills to pay, families to feed. This is a job for us. So when you feel like you're kind of putting in more than the employer is kind of, it just becomes frustrating, to say the least. One thing I just wanted to quickly touch on to what was happening, the conversation earlier, especially from my side, it's also looking at ways to kind of, because I represent the members, that's all of the members. Those are maybe that are being bullied and harassed, but also those that are doing that behavior, right? So that's also where I think there's a piece of the conversation that needs to take another step forward, that at the same time of representing people that don't have a voice, what tools do we have in place to help those people that are finding themselves in the position of like, whether it's legitimate or not is a separate conversation, but making some inappropriate comments, what's there for them to support them to kind of transition to the next place of, whether it's something that maybe they find they need help with that they didn't realize beforehand, or just the last thing that I want to see, I'm trying to choose my words here carefully, the last thing that I would want to see for everybody finding themselves in this position is that they've done something completely wrong, absolutely, and then just let go and not checked in on themselves as well. And I've seen some of that firsthand as well when I deal with some of the members who maybe find themselves on the other side of the equation, right? Just wanted to kind of touch a bit on that too.
So you've got folks who, the folks who are the responsible, the however you want to label it, right? Whether it's the inflictors of, the perpetrators of harm unto others. And you're saying like those are folks who as well may need or may want or desire resources to move forward in a better way.
I think may need and may want, but also in the same breath don't have the, what is it that they're looking for, as we've all touched on already. What are the words to use that they might need? They just flat out don't know, so how can we kind of direct them towards the help that they need as well?
Let me start with the employers. It's surprising because when you look at the Me Too movement, where did it start from? It's in that industry. And the cost is enormous to the individuals and also the organizations. The local ones may feel that, it won't cost me anything. But maybe there's a way you can articulate for them the cost of one incident. If there has to be an investigation, you may have to spend about $10,000 for that investigator alone, just to do the investigation. Then you may have to consult a lawyer. That's an additional cost to it. And if the individual impacted is not satisfied, that individual can still go to the Human Rights Commission and some other places and that is a lot of cost. We all know what happened across the road with the bakery. So maybe there's a way you can articulate for them all the costs that can come to it. For the people who are experiencing and they don't know what to do, they could also go to human rights to just seek opinion about it, or they can seek anybody in HR. I can tell you one thing. I said we have a professional organization called the Charter Professionals in Human Resources in Manitoba. Just go online. You can check the directory. You can call anybody in there and just say, I'm experiencing something where I'm working. I just need somebody to talk to know how to address it.
That's great.
An average HR person will listen to you and tell you what you can do or what you cannot do. Depending also on your group benefits plan, if there is in the industry, if you talk to the employee assistance program, it's a short-term counseling, they also can help you to put words to what you have experienced and tell you what's the next step. So is allowing employees knowing where to go to describe their experience and to label or to put words to it is very important. And let the employers know it will cost them a lot if they have an incident.
So if the employer lacks a conscience and a moral compass, say, this is going to be expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to echo that back once again. I mean, people do not consider liability, and I believe in being blunt because I believe that's when changes happen. And it's not about feelings, it's about facts. So at the end of the day, we have a lot of people with different disabilities entering categories such as fashion and dance and professional career in arts administration. So we have an industry that is seeing a huge influx in that, and we're not adequately prepared. So like he said, liability is a huge thing, huge thing. And I can even echo back when I was hiring clowns for my entertainment company years ago. And I said something the wrong way and I had no bad intent, but she's like, well, we can discuss this through human rights. And that was a huge wake-up call for me in a good way. And I really had to reflect on, I would say I was raised in a small town. I was raised relatively conservative, I would say, middle class. And so I had I didn't have Indigenous people where I lived. I didn't have a lot of people of color, right? I mean, I grew up in a really small little town and village. And that's fine, but I had no idea how to navigate those issues. I didn't even know when I was misstepping in my behavior and my language, right? So I had to learn that. And I'm glad that I looked at my policies and procedures and changed that and so on and so forth. But I think it's not about blame. Right? At the end of the day, sometimes you do need to let someone go, and sometimes, there has to be consequences and punishments for a certain behavior. But at the end of the day, we need to just reevaluate where we're at and start preparing because, the industry is changing and we need to get on that ball. We need to get on that page sooner than later.
Okay. Thank you. Anything, Angie?
This is kind of on a different line. And I know we're talking about policies and procedures kind of in a sense. But we also need to look at the art itself and how we're using that, and have conversations about cultural appropriation and what that looks like.
Sorry, can
and
you
that
just
has to
flip
be
that
part
mic?
of
Can you just a little closer?
Okay.
Thank you.
That needs to be part of this conversation as well. And so, we need to have policies and procedures in place for workers, for employees, for unions, all that sort of stuff. But we also really need to talk about art forms itself and what does that look like, and having really difficult conversations on what does it mean to appropriate something and what does it mean to pay homage to something, and what does it mean to just do something completely disrespectful, but then use for lack of a better term, an excuse of, well, it's my creative art form. Yes, art can be incredibly powerful and a beautiful message and a means for a message, but you also have to be really, really careful on how that message is portrayed and that it's not causing further harm to others.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's a big message. Thank you for that. So we have a few minutes left here, and I think that, because we're all here in Winnipeg, we maybe had different experiences growing up, whether it's rurally or here or in different communities, or maybe we're, born and raised in this frigid place. It's good. It is good. Yeah, it's great. It's amazing. It's better than the sweating. Yeah, I cross country ski now. I love the cold. Yeah, I'm not good at it. So terrible. Post a picture?
Yes.
There is one up there on the gram.
I'm gonna share that.
You share that. Share that. Okay, I got distracted. So, okay, Winnipeg. Winnipeg is it's a city that is growing, but it's kind of a city like you can't escape anything, can't escape people. You know, the communities here are overlapping and intertwined, and you know, I think generally for a number of reasons, it can be really challenging for folks to talk about experiences, whether they observe it, whether they experience it firsthand, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at an art show or concert or on a council, whatever it is. Sometimes, you know, and this is me speaking personally, and I've heard this from folks. It can feel like in Winnipeg, if you raise your voice, if you say this thing about this person, it affects so many different aspects of your life, right? It's like the scene is so small. I hear that all the time. This scene is so small. And so what do you think about when, or, you know, I'm gonna reframe that. How would you advise someone who has experienced something in a space that they want to report, that they want to share, but they're like, there's just no way I can do it. There's no way I can do it in the scene here, whatever that scene may be in Winnipeg, because everybody knows each other, right? And even though I'm right, even though I'm valid, even though everybody may agree with me and say, yeah, so-and-so is that person who does that thing, but like, you know? So how would you advise somebody who's like adamant, I don't want my name attached to this, and we're talking about in the absence of HR policies, in the absence of a formal reporting process, in the absence of being able to go to Human Rights Commission, all of those things, right? In the absence of all of those pieces, how would you advise somebody to try and have this issue addressed in communities and still maintain their confidentiality?
I really recommend expanding your horizons, right? So becoming a member of similar arts organizations or art organizations in other provinces, right? Because a lot of times they may have resources, and you can speak to someone like, you know, Lana mentioned, where you can give them a call, say this is kind of what's going on, and you have kind of some confidentiality because they may not know the person. I mean, they may. There's always that risk. Okay. But I recommend, you know, reaching within people in your groups that you feel safe. If you don't feel like you have one, which is totally a real reality, like you said, it is a small scene, reach out to other provinces and other arts organizations. I've done that often because I knew it wasn't safe for me to report. And I think we also get really worried that there's this extreme time constraint, right? So your issue doesn't expire. Right? You can revisit that later on and report it. It doesn't become any less valid. So take the time to emotionally process it, seek resources, and then make a plan of action. Right? Don't act out of fear. I think that's the biggest thing. We're so afraid, and then we make these sporadic decisions. And I also think it's great to just sit here and say, well, we'll just start reporting everything, and then the whole world's going to change. It's up to us to make, I feel, inclusivity training should be mandatory. And I feel that we need to make that super accessible so that it's not ever a situation like that. I think that's the first step.
Okay, thank you.
It was actually, Lana already brought it up, that other folks can do that reporting for you as well, right? If you want to report and for whatever reason that you're not comfortable personally doing that, if there was other folks who were there or witnessed or observed, have a conversation with them and ask them if they would be willing to go forward. Can do I can't even say the word. Say it for me, 'cause I can't say it.
Anonymous.
That one. And you actually don't have, that's not tied to making a police report. You can make your report and that stays in a confidential location, and it can stay there forever. It can stay there until you choose to pursue an investigation. They can actually just take identifiers not of you, but of the particular experience, and they can track those for commonalities between other experiences. So if folks are reporting the same type of behaviors or situations that they may have experienced sexualized violence in, they can start to track a trend around a perpetrator using a specific type of situation or anything like that. So that's specialized around sexualized violence within Manitoba as well. But yeah, if you're not comfortable going forward yourself, having conversations with folks who may have been around and saying, I'm really just not comfortable moving forward. Would you be comfortable in making a report on my behalf?
Great, thank you. Okay.
I have a suggestion.
Sure.
Take it or leave it.
Okay.
I think it would be great if all of us at the end of this workshop write down the links and resources that we are aware of, that we're comfortable sharing, and then maybe Creative Manitoba can post it on Facebook and share it. I think that'd be really powerful first step.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just have some very gentle pushback on some of this.
Okay.
Insofar as when I have somebody calling me, for example, the first thing before they start telling me something is I tell them that I can never guarantee anonymity. Because if it's something, a phrase that I come back to a lot in a lot of the reading and a lot of the kind of post-education that I've had is, if you know or ought to have known, part of that responsibility for me is now, if I have some information that needs to go forward to whether, again, I do remember you saying that we're talking specifically job sites that don't have an HR department, stuff like that, those systems not in place. There's still, I put a weight on myself that if it's now something that's said where I need to go forward, we need to go forward. Obviously, before we get to that point, there's things that I always offer. I can come and sit with them in a conversation. Again, taking out something that's maybe sexual violence or to that degree. Hopefully we're catching things before they become something kind of out of everybody's control. Talking about sitting down in discussions with people, with the person that's, if there's conflict, trying to be kind of the mediator between those two parties. A thing that happens a lot in our side, unfortunately still does, is this idea of I'll make sure that you never work in this industry again. So there's lots of kind of conversation that I have with members that we're kind of, the growth of work here in the city is it's by leaps and bounds, it's growing, trying to kind of dissuade some of those myths that just aren't the reality. They never really were the reality, they're less so these days. But I really, that anonymity piece is strong for me, because at a certain point it does become my responsibility to make sure that things are getting addressed. And that definitely is a line in the sand to some
So can you
degree.
clarify what you mean by that? Like, can you clarify what you mean by you, because kind of, and you can correct me if I'm
Please, yep.
not understanding
Yeah, yeah.
this the way that you're sharing it. So I think what I hear you saying is that you cannot, if someone says to you, I have this thing that's going on, but I need to stay anonymous, I cannot have my identity revealed as part of what I'm going to share with you, and are you saying that you would have an obligation to say to that person within your context that can't guarantee that your identity is not going to be, I'm going to have to share your identity at some point?
I always remind them that there's a possibility. Is that a really immediate possibility? Most of the time, no. And most of the time, absolutely, anonymity is there. For me, it's just if there's something that comes of this that maybe speaks to another situation and another case involving the same people, if it gets to a certain level where there's investigations, whether, again, keeping in mind that I'm thinking of a situation where there isn't an HR policy, if it gets to a level where there's an investigation, I'm obliged to say something, which would mean that I just wouldn't be able to guarantee it.
Okay.
So I think you kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for providing a bit more context to that. Okay.
So sometimes, depending on the policy, all you can guarantee is actually confidentiality to a certain extent, because when investigations will start, the alleged party or accused party has the right to know who is actually alleging that, because depending on the kind of situation. So, but if an anonymous report is made, you can't go ahead with that because the individual is not, you can't get the identity, but you can start checking what is happening in the environment. And if a lot of it is then happening, then it will be better for the organization to actually do an investigation and call people and find out what is happening. We had a similar experience. You had to do sexual harassment. It was only one lady, but we had to then speak to the other ladies connected to say, since you've been working here, have you experienced anything like this? Without mentioning names. Have you experienced this and this and this? And so on, and say, yes, I observed it with this person and this person. So they didn't know who actually made the report. So based on that, we knew exactly what was going on in that context. And if it's something like the industry that somebody can cut you off and you won't get a job, maybe you should consult with, I think, the human rights to see how they can do such a thing without jeopardizing people's employment. So if they feel comfortable.
I kind of want to bring it back, though, because the reality of a lot of folks working in the arts industry in any way, shape, or form, I mean, it could be something like open mic nights. It could be something like, we're talking about comedy nights, for example, right? Or I say open mics because we host open mics, so poetry or slam poetry, whatever it is. It's like, I don't want to be identified because this is a community. This is a community in the arts, and if I say this thing against this person who's like the best slam poet in Winnipeg, I'm not saying, I don't even know who the best slam poet in Winnipeg is. I'm not saying about anybody. I'm just giving an example. Then I'm not going to feel comfortable going to these spaces where I get to perform and express myself artistically this way. So, like, no HR process, no any of that. How do you, and we've gotten like really good from everybody so far, but I want to make sure that we're talking within the context of without formal process.
So I'm glad you made that distinction, because they are two extremely separate things. And I would say depends like what your province and your market is, right? Like Manitoba, I would say a lot of artists are working in the independent arts, right? So indie artists, okay? Yeah. So there's absolutely no corporate involvement. Now let's go back to administrators who do have some of those departments or staff or people in place. Another thing that sister organizations can do is have. I don't want to jump in, I'm sorry, but I really want to focus on folks who would be in situations without those resources. I think it's really important because there are so many people who, before they get to a place of having any of that, right? Many folks, and maybe their whole careers are spent in community without those resources. And I'm going to get to that. So I'll skip that one point. Okay. So when we talk about the power of a bystander, okay, so I really recommend going on CHRC's website and following up on the stuff I've been talking about today, because it'll outline it clear. I never estimate the power of a bystander, okay? So something you did mention, which is really powerful, is you can't guarantee that no one's gonna find out. And especially when you're dealing in the indie scene, when it's like a smaller market, it's gonna come out though. That's the thing, is people think you can hide things and cover them up. It's gonna come out in some shape, way, or form. So at the end of the day, you're gonna have to deal with it, and it'll fester and it'll get worse, right? So like I said, reach out to fellow bystanders and people that you can trust. Okay. They don't have to have a professional background. They don't need to be affiliated with any specific organization, but they may have experienced some things and have some tools. So I would say, don't be so afraid to reach out to people. Okay,
thank you.
I think the fact that we're struggling to answer the question is clearly identifying a huge gap, right? And yes, the power of bystanders is absolutely something that you can utilize. Looking at what you can do as far as, peaceful activism. If you're experiencing something within, the slam poetry world, I'm just joking. But yeah, if there's a particular venue where something has been coming up, or there's one particular narrative that keeps being played, have a conversation with the folks that you trust, and maybe there's a group of you that goes to that space and performs, a type of peaceful protest or some type of nonviolent interaction within that to alter that space. And how can you do that in a safe way that you are saying, no, this is not acceptable. And yes, we don't have a specific mechanism to address this, but we aren't going to just sit by and let that happen.
Okay.
So that's what I was trying to articulate.
No,
Thank you
it's
for
great.
helping me
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
Was that bystander integrity. And there is legislation with that now in the arts workplaces, which there wasn't before. So we have the power. We don't have to form a not-for-profit or another committee to make a change. We're the frontline people. There's mass in frontline, right? There's more artists than there's art administrators. So you don't have to rely on a trade organization to make these significant changes. You have a voice and you have power. So exactly what she said. Reach out to those people, work with them, and it could be just going to someone else's rehearsal and making observations and notes and support each other.
Yeah.
Starting there.
Okay.
So I listening to you because I don't know much about your industry. And I'm thinking, is there a way we can start creating this awareness for the employers or find influencers among them to sell the idea that this is happening in our industry and we want it addressed? Is there a way maybe they have an annual general meeting and there's a guest speaker that speaks to some of this? So that if this awareness is being created at that level, maybe it will begin to come down also. And if these behaviors are being pointed out, maybe some people will start catching themselves and start working on it. So we work at both ends. The people who are impacted, we look at those who are influencers within. Sure. If there's a way we can do that to any of the organizations, just let me know. Let's see how we can bring that awareness to it.
That's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, folks. And to a point you made earlier, Terrence, about folks hearing, I'll ruin your career if you say anything, and this will be the end of your ability to work or whatever it is. And I think I heard you correctly. You said that's not true. There's an abundance of now opportunity, but that line that people use to silence folks is effective. Has been effective. Where if folks knew, it's sort of like a myth, right? Like actually somebody may say that to you, and in some situations may be real in workplaces or in your experiences, but what you're saying is actually there's not a whole lot of truth to that all the time, and folks need to hear that message as well. Yeah.
And it's something that I do on almost a daily basis. Maybe 20 years ago when there was one show that was coming through, maybe that was more of a reality, but we were also dealing with a much smaller amount of people that were working on shows. Since I started this job, there's times at the beginning of the day, I open call sheets, which is kind of the work day for each of the shows. Okay. We're seeing kind of 6 or 7 productions at the same time. And we're bringing people in from not only out of the province, out of the country on some of these on some of these shows just to fill the positions. So it's just, I try to just get out there and talk to people and tell them those stories of there's so many people that we need locally to kind of collect on the tax credits, et cetera, which I think is a bigger conversation that maybe is not worth getting into. Yeah. But I think, like you said, is right. It's just kind of reminding people that just isn't the way anymore. And here's some hard evidence to show you that it's just not reality. And especially for us, and again, moving away from a lot of the non-HR stuff, speaking from the local standpoint gives a little bit more of that impact as well too, I can speak directly to some of the issues, and just making sure we're out there and we're having the same message that we're sending out when we're all going to discuss, and that goes for everybody that's Creative Manitoba Film and Music, etc. All having that same message.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we are 7:18. So I think we're going to open it up for, we are not 7:18, the time is 7:18. Like, we're 7:18, what does that mean?
You got to say more gangster a little bit, like 7:18.
That's not really that gangster. I don't
You're
even
right,
know what
you're
that,
right.
yeah.
I was
not sure
trying,
what
I was
that,
trying.
yeah. So, I'm also really happy to know that I can get a job in the film industry tomorrow. And, I expect 7 figures immediately, Terrence. So I'd like to open it up to questions from folks who are in the room, any thoughts that have come up for you during this time. Maybe before that, if we could actually give everybody on the panel a round of applause as a thank you. And are there any questions that came up for folks? Yeah, I see you've got lots of questions.
Shoot him, go for it.
Okay, we'll run you the mic.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for suggesting that you would maybe be able to put together links for us. I was wondering if you could include links, for instance, when you're a small organizer, no funding, how do you know that you're writing policies that are actually within the law?
Good question.
So to answer that, that will be included in the links. And like I said, this information is openly available on CHR's website. Everything you could ever need that we're talking about specifically today to get started is available. CHRC has just launched the Maintaining Respectful Workplace workshop, and there's 4 spots per province until March 2020 to take this training for your arts organization for its members or administrators for free. We've got a government grant for it till March. After that, you can still bring in consultants. It won't be free, but the information is still there. The nice thing about consultants is that we'll be able to do this, right? Question and answers and go a little bit deeper and kind of customize our answers towards your specific legislation, your province, or your specific needs of your organizations or challenges that you've had. But that being said, all of this basic information is on CHR's website, and I will be sure to include all of that information for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think I'm the only person that has done all of the organizations and belongs to all of the film unions at the same time. I have, like, rather than a question, actually, like what Lana was saying about funding, I think is the only thing that could actually go anywhere towards solving all of these issues. I have been on sets where I have been the recipient of a harassment complaint. I have been on sets where the person that is the harassment rep is actually the person that is being complained against. I have played in a touring band all over the world. I've been in spaces where there's harassment that I can see, but I feel like when it does make a difference when it hits the wallet, and I think that in the specific case of film, I think there needs to be a way to address it in the Tax Credit Act, in which we make it less profitable if there are complaints against. Then it's not just always like sexually unsafe. It's always just sometimes there's like labor standards that are unsafe. So other things, and racially unsafe. That's happened to me on sets as well. And so I feel like there should be a standard whereby the tax credits are something you receive also based on good behavior, and that I feel like that would get more buy-in from the employers. And the employers also, like, for context, are far more powerful than the employees in a lot of these instances in film, right? There are people that are coming from LA. Sometimes they're millionaires, sometimes they're billionaires that have gotten away with a lot of things in their entire careers, and sometimes there are locals that are like under a lot of pressure to finish a movie, and a complaint is actually something that is getting on the way of delivering the film, which is their main priority, and that's understandable. And so these things make it sort of like oodles more complicated in a sort of larger industry that has more than one union working together, and so there's a lot of things that need to happen before. Right now, my job is to I work at the Western Cultural Center, and my intention here is I wanted to come and learn how to make the place safer for audiences, the place safer for the people that are coming to listen to music. We want to present more diverse music. We want to sort of include the communities, and I kind of wanted to know if any of you have any suggestions about in relationships that are between different communities, right? Like, obviously we have an indigenous population very high in this neighborhood. The Eritrean community, the Ethiopian community are right across the street. There's a lot of Filipino people in the neighborhood, and they're very rarely in our room. And so I kind of want to figure out how I can make my room safer for those people so they can come into our space and enjoy themselves the way everybody else does.
So I can't fully answer some of the complexity of what you're saying because that is very deep, but I can kind of give you a starting point. So CHRC has actually actively developed code of conducts for all the industries, and they're very specific outlines. Once again, I'll include that on the links. So your organization can sign that. But once again, compliance, auditing, right? Because you can write it, you can sign, like set posts on the wall, but that's only going to do so much. But some of the checklists that I've developed and other people have developed, you can actually give yourself a rating system. And I would really like to see that developed within Canada. And it doesn't have to be an official governing body to do that. Once again, we're a community, we can do it ourselves. Like all it takes is one person to start that fire, right? If you think about a forest fire, right? It's one match. So that's what I want to say is that like with the equal amount of force of discrimination and the issues we've had, you know, with the power imbalance, there's power in numbers. Do something. And it's as simple as signing those code of conducts, getting a hold of those checklists and so on forth. Like I said, I will post. And then sitting down with your board or yourself and evaluating where you're at within those different things and calling and, you know, approaching the organizations that you're a member of, not an administrator of, and saying like, this is where we're kind of lacking, right? You have the right to vote. You have a voice at those meetings if you're a member. Use that voice. Like you said, how often are those people coming in the room? And I think that's something that we need to say, hey, we're not perfect. We recognize we need to make changes in diversity and inclusion. Can you please come and tell us what we need to hear? Most often you hear for people who've experienced trauma or situations like I have, it's like, well, who's going to listen? What's going to happen, right? So we need to say, hey, we're okay with having uncomfortable conversations and, you know, opening up the table, right? And then being honest about where you're at and how you're going to work on it. Say like, we don't have the answers yet, but right now in the next few months, part of our, you know, our goals for the next season is what can we change in these specific areas?
And also, all it takes is one match to start a forest fire. So
100%.
just want to make sure on camera we're not encouraging anyone
No
to go
forest,
out
but no arson,
and start.
please. Thank
Yeah,
you.
okay. All right.
Liability.
Thank you, yeah.
I just want to speak to the second half of your question, and I'm sorry I didn't quite catch where you said you worked.
West End Cultural Center.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to situate within the city. So you're talking about building relationships. And so what are you doing in that effort? How are you reaching out to those communities? Instead of just asking communities to come into your space, how are you actively going out and building those relationships? And so what does that look like? Is it going to, you know, Spence Center? Is it going to wherever, you know, a community center? Is it going to a resource center? How are you starting to build those relationships instead of just saying, here, we're open, come on in, we create safe spaces? You have to build a relationship so that there's an understanding of that. And so that as you start to go down that road, that relationship is going to allow for conversations so that when you get to the point where folks come in and visit your center, if they have a poor experience, they will then be able to tell you about that. So I recognize that's where you want to, that's the end goal, but there's a lot that needs to be done before that. And so it's really looking at how do you start building those relationships with the community around you and going out to them, not asking them to come to you.
Another thing is you don't necessarily have to be like a sister organization, right? So if you run a venue, have coffee, plan a meetup with other people who run venues and say, what are some challenges you guys are experiencing? Have you tried to create an inclusive, you know, policies and procedures manual, and what has happened? Has it helped? What do we need to do, right? So it starts with coffee. So like I do a lot of consultation with like, it does, I drink a lot of coffee. My stomach tells me that every day. So I go to a lot of rural organizations and I call them, and my favorite thing they say is like, well, where'd you come from? And why are you calling? I'm like, because I'd like to have a conversation. And, you know, we have digital technology. We have Skype. We have Google Hangouts. You can have video chats for free, right? You don't even have to necessarily travel to those places. So like you said, approaching those groups respectfully and say, I'm here to listen. Let's start.
Okay. Maybe we can connect afterwards, because I know the city of Winnipeg has one committee that is for ethnic groups and so on. And there are representatives on that committee. I think I know someone on that committee. The Ethnocultural Council, of Winnipeg. So if you link up with that, that will give you an entry into the communities, and you think about what Angie said, then visit them And that will be something that they'll be open to. Because like when you were talking about having a lot of jobs, I was wondering, because there are people in the Nigerian community who have interest in all of that, and it's like they don't know what to do. So one of them, I was just trying to say, why don't you just go on the website, call them, and go there? Some people just feel as if I can't approach. So I'm saying, no, this community is not like that. Pick up the phone and call. And like you said, say, I'm going to come maybe just for coffee or just during the lunch hour. I just want to find out. So I will be able to do that with you, and I'll connect with you too.
I'm actually going to jump in because I think something that often gets missed or lost actually is not only in building, it is about building relationships really and truly with communities if you want folks to actually access spaces, but it's also about, I mean, you can have as many meetings as you want with sister, partner, organizations, and you can put all the minds together, but if all the minds together at the table are not inclusive of the folks that you want in your spaces, you're just going to waste your time, right? So take a good look, I would say, at who's involved in those conversations, right? And brainstorming, how do we get folks, here and feeling comfortable? And if it's, if you think about, I think about, queer communities, I think about communities of color, Black communities, and, if you've got a table full of cis white men, right, who are trying to figure out how do we get anybody else here to listen to us or to get to, and you're going to come up with ideas within your relationships and your networks and your experiences as cis white men, right? So maybe, draw some people in, like invite people to the table, say, take up space here with us. We're going to listen to your expertise, and always make sure that you're paying those people and compensating those people for their labor, because that is labor, that is expertise, and that is time, and that has a value. Those are my 2 cents.
To add on what you were saying, just kind of said something I said earlier is about, reaching out to other provinces, right? So it could be taking webinars online. It could be going to their conferences. And like I said, don't be stuck within your borders, right? Because when you're talking about actors or performers and musicians, they travel across Canada and, a lot of times the US and other countries. So you don't have to be an official person. You can wear many hats and still have something to bring to the table, right? And I think sometimes we get caught up in we always have to have a professional involved. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that due diligence and research and bring those people to the table, but a voice is a voice. And also another thing is, don't assume that one person represents the voice of an entire community, right? I'm a person with a disability. I don't know everything there is to know about disability. I'm constantly reading and asking questions and, like I said, working on my language and my behavior and trying to change. And it's just being, humble and saying, listen, I don't know everything, but I want to get better, right? And so does that, because I don't know everything, doesn't mean I can't contribute? No, all of us can contribute, right? We've all learned things, we've all had experiences. And I think that Canada as a province is because the Me Too movement especially, we're very open to having these conversations and working together. I think now, I think it was you mentioned changes in the 5 years, I've definitely seen that. People are very open to giving you resources and working with you. So you never know who your allies can be and who's willing to work with you. So if they say no or they're not the right people, an example you mentioned, that's fine, move on. But you're gonna get an open door. You're gonna get somewhere eventually.
Elise, you have a question?
Yeah, this is actually a little bit more of a comment than a question. And I just wanted to comment make this comment for the independent artists in the room, because whether you're in a touring band or whether you're an actor or you're a comedian, I had a phone conversation with someone from Six Shooter Records in Toronto, and what they've started doing for all of their artists is to put a code of conduct directly in their contract, and it's a code of conduct that they make for their artists. They're all individual, so that person can be comfortable in the space that they're being sent to. And I think that's just something I'm gonna be having Six Shooter here to talk about it in January. But I think if we normalize that, and everybody's contract comes with a code of conduct, it is important for us to talk about our own space that we're working in and what we need to feel comfortable as artists.
To add to something you say, your comment, that's perfect. Thank you for articulating that. We can't always, like I said, assume that everyone's going to know the right or wrong thing to say. Like, that's just impossible. It takes time, like, to learn, like, the appropriate languages, right? As an artist from day one, I've had code of conducts in my contract. It's 4 pages long. And every time someone does something, like, all right, I guess I'm going to add a clause there. But I'm very clear, and I ask for payment up front. I understand that, you know, artists get paid, especially independent artists, in all kinds of ways. But I'm saying that I have a very clear zero tolerance policy. And it's really simple. Anybody who harasses me or bullies me, I'm out. And I don't give you a refund. And that's another way to protect myself. So people will only treat you the way you ask to be treated, right? So have boundaries, have self-respect, and love yourself enough to, like, you know, educate people, but to say, this is my stance on things. I think we're so afraid to be who we are and have our morals and our beliefs and values because we don't want to lose friends. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, it's not, the chance of that happening now is a lot smaller. So I think put that in your contracts.
So, and you're talking about a contract as an artist. Okay.
Educator, panelist, whatever. Like, we're used to getting contracts, but even when I rent a space, like, I have an accessibility policy in my contract. Right? So if I feel that that space is like a toxic environment for my performers in any shape, way, like, I'm done and I'm not paying you. And I think that is also part of it, is like the contracts, and not just, hey, don't do this, but like, you don't do this, I don't pay you. And that's really worked for me because I don't pay.
Okay. And Terrence, I think you were going to say something before.
I was just to kind of echo what you said before. If you're going to have people contribute their time, make sure you pay them. You know, just kind of treat it as their expertise and make sure you're paying them. Yeah.
And is exposure? Why are you laughing? What? So that you can't eat exposure? Oh, okay. So someone, okay, just clarifying, because yeah. Okay, thank you. That's a valid question. So I made that kind of little joke comment because that is something that I've heard. Okay, yeah, I've seen from people that a couple of things. One, I've seen folks say we don't have the ability to compensate you financially, but we do have resources that we can provide to you, right? So I've seen a lot of folks in communities say things like, hey, you know, this thing that we'd like for you to do, performance or whatever it is, we can't compensate you financially, but we do have the ability to, you know, create this piece of art, for example, or a poster to showcase your work, and you can keep that piece of art and you can use that as a way to promote yourself. Or I can design this thing for you, or I can, you know, utilize this skill that I have as an exchange. Yeah, exactly. I've seen that in community, and people have made that work really well. And I've seen other people do things like, I'm going to host this event. It's like $25 a ticket per person. We're probably going to sell out like 400 tickets. We need you to perform a 2-hour set, and it's going to be great exposure for you. No mention of compensation. And I think an important thing actually to highlight in that is where I've seen that most often impact folks, it's women of color, it's racialized folks who I've seen most often are the ones who are told that this is a great opportunity for you, it's exposure you wouldn't get otherwise. And even in situations where white artists are being compensated, and the artists of color or Black and Indigenous artists who are involved are not being compensated. So that's why I brought that up. Thank you for asking your question.
Which also just speaks to a bigger thing too, of just a general conversation of how does everybody have those financial conversations, you know, because that's a big thing, but maybe a derailment. Yeah.
Next workshop. Yeah.
Another thing I would say is keep things in writing, right? And that's another layer of liability and protection for yourself, whether you're an artist or you're an administrator, union, anything. Have it on paper, right? A lot of times when we're talking about like the arts workplace, how contracts go down is the verbal agreement. So you started off with committing an hour of DJing, and now all of a sudden it's 3.5 hours, and you're only getting paid for that hour. So, you know, you have to be really clear, right? And you have to set those expectations of yourself and know what your worth is. Find out what the professional fees are for your category. Are you, you know, an amateur, semi-professional, professional artist? Like, how do you fall in line with Canada Council, Manitoba Arts Council, and kind of work from there? No one else can determine your value. You can. And we need to start saying no to things that are unhealthy. right? So like you have a choice. You can say, I'm not going to do that for exposure. If you want to, great, but you don't have to. And don't try to wear the weight of your community on your shoulders, right? We're still individuals within those communities, right? So someone else may say yes to that gig, but you're not going to, and that's fine, right? Like your boundaries are your boundaries, and that's what I would say is have those and have them in writing. I think once again, it depends, and I think that there's been a big push in terms of entrepreneurs in certain age groups, right? When you talk millennials for barter and trade, because a lot of us are strapped for cash, right? So if I have someone who does photography for my event, well, I'm like, you know what, then you can have, for example, my dance crew at your next event for free. And like I said, it sometimes it's not always in like an equal barter, but I think that a lot of artists do accept that, but there needs to become a point where you're like, yes, I do need to buy bread, right? And that's what you as a person needs to figure out, but I don't think you should work for free. I think there's always an exchange that can happen, and I think if you're gonna ask artists to work for free, like as an administrator, right, you need to promote them. So you need to learn how to do these things. You need to, take a hold of those skill sets so that you're not, like I hear all the time, we're just Manitoba, we're not Toronto. Well, we can learn, right? Like we can get better. So I think art is a business. Run it like a business and learn how to do that. Okay. Protect your artists, right? Empower them, help them make money.
Okay. Terrence?
It was just a quick one, just communicating that right out of the front, right? That's always the best way. If that's what you can do, that's what you can do. But I think just making sure that that's one of the first things that you say right out of the gate. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. There's, I think the respectful way to approach it is just can't pay you, recognize your expertise, recognize your labor, and value that. Would this be acceptable for you? And is there a way that we can make this work?
I just wanted to go back to, you brought up, like, in a lot of cases, this is marginalized folks that are kind of being further exploited in these ways. And so, and I recognize it's also like we have 15 minutes, so this might be a big discussion to like delve into in 15 minutes. But honestly, we need to really talk about supremacy and superiority, and what does that look like within these spaces as well. And so when you recognize specific groups of people are not being valued, and other groups are, whether that's an organization that's doing that or an individual, those things need to be called out, like upfront, dead center. Absolutely. This is not acceptable. And it shouldn't be the onus of those people who are being further exploited to be the voice to do that. Every single person has the ability and should be speaking up against that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing to add on to what you're saying is when people are working with different organizations, whether they're partner, sister, affiliate, they'll say, well, I don't really know because I'm not the one hosting or planning the event, right? So have a collaboration agreement that has within it a code of conduct to kind of, like, if they don't know and help them learn that, right? So that there isn't this, like, irresponsibility. Like, I know as an artist, like, I've been at events where it's like, they just pass the buck. Well, I don't know, I'll talk to my supervisor and all. And like, I've literally was at a show once where, like, 3.5 hours in, and now the show has started and I still don't have an answer. And like actively, like when you're talking about like harassment in live action and things happening in live action, like you need to have something that you can pull on a Google Doc on your phone that you can, look at and deal with, like contact people. Like once again, someone who's locked outside, somebody was trying to get into a wheelchair, an elevator for people in wheelchairs, and it went off. And now that person is literally stuck in an elevator. No one knows they're there. It's the dead of winter. Like this space isn't heated. They could freeze to death, right? So a part of like protecting people, safer spaces, I also think about, like we're talking about like workplace and labor health and safety, is like having emergency policies and procedures of like how you're going to deal with certain incidents, and having like a contact person on call so that someone isn't stuck at a rehearsal or a show where like live action is horrible things are happening to them and they're going down and there's literally no one they can reach out to in the moment. I think having that in place is really important.
Okay. Lana?
And I think of recent, the provincial government has been coming up with things on accessibility. So maybe you need to check. Because like for workplace safety, if anybody is performing in here, it's the responsibility of the organization here to ensure that they are safe. And it's also the responsibility of the organization to ask the performing artists to ensure that things are done properly because it's on their premises. So maybe part of the resources, I don't know, you have it also, accessibility standards that the government has been coming up with. Maybe people need to get a copy of that.
There's a 6-page manual, and it's very specific, like how many inches should your ramp be, how, like, very, very detailed. You can take some of these courses through the Canadian Red Cross, but there is some checklists. Like, people have done actual research and gone into venues and analyzed them. So like I said, I will post that on the link. So this is not it is a complicated thing, but luckily you don't have to think about it. The resource is already there.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Tons of information that I'm getting. Most of it is already, in terms of links and sites, gone. So I'm looking forward to having that resource as well. And thank you, Angie, for bringing that up about supremacy in spaces. And we talk about, when we talk about creating safer spaces, we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about white supremacy. We have to talk about ableism. We have to talk about phobias, transphobia, queerphobia. We have to talk about all of these things, and also have to acknowledge who owns these spaces, who's creating these spaces, who's involved in these conversations if we're going to do this work honestly and transparently in a way that is compassionate and hopefully thinking about long-term outcomes, not just the event in the moment or whatever it is. Does anybody else have any other questions or concerns or would like some clarification on anything that was talked about tonight?
So generally we would bar people that would violate our policies. And with an understanding that people who have been victimized, traumatized, abused, that we shouldn't expect for them to have a face-to-face dialogue with the people that have accused them. How do we carry that truth while also understanding that there could be a value in opening avenues for dialogue or reconciliation rather than just ostracizing people? And it could be just from a venue, but generally those sort of spaces are tied to a greater community. And so these people are basically ostracized, and other people have come to me in my organizations with that concern is, can anybody just accuse anyone of anything without any sort of avenues of examining it, while also realizing that people who have been traumatized should not have to fight and be questioned in that way that contributes to their re-traumatization.
So it's kind of like a two-part question.
Yeah, and I understand there's likely not an easy answer. It's it really gets into the messy parts of safer space policies. But it's something the organizations I'm a part of are dealing with, and also other really tiny organizations, because there doesn't seem to be, we haven't quite gotten that far.
Thank you for those questions. I'm gonna let Angie go first, and then we'll go to you, Terrence.
So it's less policy related, but I would just offer that there's learnings that can be taken from a restorative justice approach. That knowledge has been used in situations of very horrific incidents, and there's ways to, and it's not just a one-time process, it's an extended process. And so I guess the question would be, are your organizations willing to put in the time to do that extended process? And if they are, then start to look at what that looks like. Because I don't think it is just a simple sit down, have a conversation, okay, we're done. It is going to be a longer process of what does that look like? What was the incident? What was the harm caused? What was the triggering for that incident? It speaks to what Terrence said before. There's something that was happening for that other individual in that moment too, and so we need to talk about that, and what does that other individual need as a support, so that with the end goal hopefully being that we don't have to experience that type of incident later on down the line. So I would just offer that, just from my own perspective, is that looking at it from more of a restorative process, and looking at how do we, there was an incident that disrupted balance, and how do we come back to balance. So that would be what I would offer.
Okay.
And I think, setting aside the fact that, of course, every case is going to have its own severity with it, but honestly, getting comfortable being in an uncomfortable space, as far as what are you doing kind of on a, let's say last month we had 0 incidences. What are we talking about? What are we regularly meeting about? What kind of discussions are we having generally? Makes it easier to have those if you've already kind of established that core group of people that are just communicating about things in general. When those incidences come up, getting used to being uncomfortable talking about something super awkward that happened the night before, because it's not easy to have the conversations. But I think that's what ends up stopping a lot of people, that uncomfortableness, just trying to get used to being in that space, right? And how can you deal with it? And of course, there's going to be situations where, listen, what happened was 100% unacceptable. This is why. That's why this person is no longer allowed to contribute. Just kind of being confident to say those things out loud too, even in a group of people where you may agree with them 90% of the time. It still can be trying to say those kind of words out loud when it's something that needs to be addressed to that degree, or some variation of that, right? Is that sort of, yeah?
I know we haven't touched on it a lot, which is the audience. So how does safer spaces relate to the audience, right? So certain places like Goodwill Social Club have kind of laid out, this is what we're not going to put up with. And I think when we talk about your security staff or your, front of house greeter, whether the person taking the tickets or whatever, a lot of times they may be just kind of at the event, talking to their friends, or they're on their cell phone or whatever. So they may not see things that are happening in the audience, or if they do, something you kind of mentioned was they're friends with the other friends. So it's a biased opinion, right? It's not really the full scope. So I would really highly suggest, whether they're volunteer paid, that's another topic, but having somebody come in to be present at venues, right? Whether they're just even training that front of house person to watch for certain things, because we have security for somebody punching someone in the face. But the thing is trauma and psychological damage, right, has the same effect as somebody punching you in the face, right? So trauma is trauma, whether it's physical or verbal, right? And I think that is also the change in legislation was what did they say? Did they say they're going to kill you, or right? It was very specific on words. And the nice thing about being a little bit more broad is you can kind of see hints of racism or transphobia or ableism or whatever, right? So having someone who's neutral at those events, who can kind of observe and make some notes to deal with that. So when you have that post meeting, you can reflect on it. And I think, neutral parties, engage them as much as you can, because then I don't think you'll ever escape a tie-in. But if you had someone who comes from the music industry to a fine art show, well, and that might be pretty a neutral person to bring in, right? So, like I said, go within different disciplines, different provinces, and bring in those people.
I just want to be sure I got you right. Let me describe my understanding. Let's assume a patron of the puppy shop that we're in right now is being nasty to one of the people walking in here, to the point that we have to say, you have to leave. Okay, and you are not supposed to come back here again. And he lives in the neighborhood, and he would still like to come. That's the kind of situation, right? So for me, depending on the investigation and what was his response to being told that your behavior is not okay. If it's apologetic and it's not up to physical violence and so on, you can say, okay, fine, you get a shot again to come. But you ensure somebody's watching out to see how it will interact. That is for the patron. But for the staff also, you need to have a discussion as to the triggers and so on. Right. And it may be that that individual is not there on that day, just for you to observe. Or maybe the person has to walk in the back. We've experienced in the museum before that we had to tell somebody you are not allowed here again. So you just got to go out. But after you look at the situation, you can say, okay, yes, you can come. We pull that person from the floor and see your behavior before we allow you again.
To add what you're saying, thank you for articulating that. So it's as simple as having an instant report. And you can, like, if you have insurance, they give those to you for free. You can get them for free. Human resources, like, I have no problem sharing these things. But having somebody who has those on hand so they can take notes and fill it out is really important. Being aware, like you mentioned, of the triggers and things like the language and what not to use. Another thing I really am not a fan of is the cancel culture, right? We're not here to, because sometimes the person who is saying they're protecting someone is actually being the bully, right? So I don't believe in embarrassing people and making a scene. So for example, say you're a musician on stage and you see a guy like actively sexually harassing or assaulting a girl in the audience. Well, I mean, that's a pretty big venue, right? Like a big concert venue. And they're like, okay, don't do that. And the security escorts them out. Now, I think when we talk about cell phones and privacy, I think that we have a right to make mistakes and learn from them. So I think I would recommend making, an incident report, pulling that person aside out of the view of everyone else, not with your phone going, try to de-escalate the situation. Now that comes from my background in security, and I went to school for policing. So my whole thing is like, calm the situation, get as much information as you can. I have a 24-hour rule with anything I've ever dealt with. And that goes back to my John Maxwell leadership training. We're all emotional. Even if we think we're neutral and biased, we're all emotional. Get the facts, sleep on it, talk to other people who are experts or may have, right? Like, but don't ignore it. And make sure whoever is involved, right, in a public instance, say with the audience, that you get phone numbers, names, emails, and take record of it. You can't be like, oh, it's just one off, that guy's just being a jerk, man, whatever. It's just like, if you see him, tell your security, right? If you see him at the next show, don't let him, well, I don't really feel it's like an adequate way of dealing with it, right? And I'm not saying like post pictures and selfies of all the people who've done something wrong, but like that's also, like I said, that to me, that's another form of bullying. Positively, respectfully deal with it. Get the facts, but do it in a very calm, mediated situation. Don't leave it for too long, but don't be responsive in the way that's like grabbing somebody's neck, pull them out, because there is liability, right? Like if someone at your front staff door pulls someone down and they break their arm, are you going to pay for that insurance? So it's something that you have to deal with very gently, right? But deal with it.
And there are nuances, right? Like not every situation is the same. I think it's important, and I do want to say that, and I get where you're coming from, being and not being a fan of cancel culture, and I think there are situations where people should be canceled, fully, where spaces should be canceled fully, and that's okay too. And I don't think that we need to make anybody feel badly about that if there's a situation where it's like, actually, you know what, you can't come back to this space. It is a safety issue. Or we'll reevaluate this in time. But I think one of the things that's really important to make sure we're talking about and acknowledging is safety, fundamentally, right? And so even when it comes to reporting, even when it comes to evaluating a situation, you got to look at, as an organizer, your safety. You got to look at the person's safety who's making this report, who has had this experience, and taking that into consideration in terms of those conversations, right? So have that conversation, in the examples that have kind of gone around here. This thing has happened. Someone says you've done this, or this was observed. We need you to leave, right? And checking in with the person who's had that experience and evaluating where they're at, what they would like to see happen. Can you check in with them and have that conversation, and centering their feelings and their needs and their experience, and certainly, bottom lining that safety is of the utmost importance ultimately at the end of the day. And safety is going to look different for different people, right? There are some folks who something might happen to me or be said to me, and I'm like, that made me feel highly unsafe, totally uncomfortable. I'm not okay with it. No, I don't want this person. No, I'm not willing to go to the back. If this person comes here, I'm not willing to not do exactly what I typically do in this space to accommodate that person. If that's how I feel, in the organizing that I've been a part of, I'm like, okay, that's what we're going to center in this, right? So I think a part of it is, what are your values? What are your organization's values, right? who are you centering in this process and why? And also expanding and talking, like you're here today for a reason, talking to experts, people who do this, talking to community, talking to folks who have had those experiences and figuring out what makes the most sense in any given situation. It's complex and it's nuanced.
So there is legislation when it comes to cyberbullying, okay? And there's a couple of recommendations I have based on some of the things you've said, okay? So in a case where it's not live action, right? So you've heard from other people, you want to make sure that you're not giving in to gossip and rumors, because not everything people say is true. So it's important to, make documentation, have a discussion with that person. If you're unsure how to approach that discussion, right? Like say you've heard this performer inappropriately touches women, and it's before a dance rehearsal.
We've got 1 minute, just so you know.
Okay, so anyways. So talk to those people, right? Then investigating mechanisms, those groups, speak to them. Another example is if you had a venue and the performer said that there's been creepy guys following them and they're worried they're going to come. I had a venue that I rented that I said, listen, these women do not feel safe with these particular men coming. I want to make sure the security knows, here's the picture. I don't want them in here. And they say, well, we can't do that. So they're putting business over the safety of my performers. I'm canceling the event. And I'm not paying you. So once again, like you have, I love saying that, I'm sorry. I'm not paying you. Independent woman, right? Anyways, I'm sassy like that. So anyways, yeah, like you need to have those conversations and make a stance.
Okay. We have no more time, really. But, however, with that in mind, if there are any other questions, concerns, comments, I think these folks, I certainly will be here for a few more minutes. I think a few folks might be here for a couple minutes. Absolutely no pressure to stay any longer than you have time. I want to thank you each, Angie, Lana, Stephanie, Terrence. Thank you so much for your knowledge, for your experience, your expertise, and sharing that with us today. Thank you to everyone for attending, for your questions, for holding space around what is a very, very evolving and important conversation. We will have the resources posted someplace. There's about 100 of them. All of the websites will have 100 of the things. And thank you so much to everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Manitoba Music, Creative Manitoba. Not sure why that didn't. Film Training Manitoba, and to the Tallest Poppy, to Talia, and everybody here, thank you so much.